It's been nearly 25 years to the day that 18-year-old Angie Dodge was murdered in her Idaho Falls apartment. Now her family is finally receiving justice, but they say it is not enough.
It was a case that shook a quiet town, a brutal murder that left a deep impact. This story isn't just about the crime, it's about a long fight for justice that lasted nearly 2 decades, involving wrongful convictions and a relentless search for the truth. This is the story of Angie Dodge. Angie Dodge was born on December 21st, 1977, in Vancouver, Washington, a charming city with a small-town feel, surrounded by lush forests and scenic views of the Columbia River. As the youngest of 4 siblings, Angie was cherished by her family. Her mother, Carol, described her as a bright, lively, and compassionate young woman with a heart of gold. Angie had a natural curiosity about the world, a love for animals, and an adventurous spirit that led her to enjoy outdoor activities like camping and hiking. She was also known for her empathy and kindness, always willing to lend a helping hand to those in need. By 1996, Angie was 18 years old and had recently graduated from Idaho Falls High School after moving to Idaho. She was a young woman with a bright future, ready to begin her own journey in life. But on June 13, 1996, everything changed. That day brought an event that would shock her family and friends and spark one of the most talked about investigations in Idaho's history. June 12th began like any other day for Angie Dodge. She spent the morning running errands, catching up with friends, and enjoying the newfound independence that came with living in her own apartment. Angie had only recently moved into her new place in Idaho Falls, and she was excited about this new chapter in her life. It was a modest apartment, but for Angie, it represented freedom and adulthood. That evening, Angie spoke with her mother, Carol, on the phone. They talked about their plans for the upcoming weekend, and Angie mentioned that she was considering going to a party later that night. Carol reminded her to be careful and to call if she needed anything. It was a conversation like many others they'd had, with no indication that it would be their last. Angie attended a small gathering that night, but she left early, around 11 p.m, to go home. Angie was in good spirits as she headed back to her apartment and ready to unwind before going to bed. Unfortunately, Angie would never get that chance. The next morning, on June 13th, Carol Dodge began to worry when she hadn't heard from Angie. Angie was usually good about staying in touch, and it wasn't like her to go silent. Carol tried calling her daughter several times, but each call went unanswered. As the hours passed, Carol's concern grew, and she asked a co-worker and friend of Angie's to check on her. What they discovered upon entering Angie's apartment was beyond anything they could have imagined. Angie was found in her bedroom, the victim of a vicious and brutal attack. She had been sexually assaulted, and her throat was slashed multiple times. The scene was a nightmare with clear signs of a struggle. It was evident that Angie had fought for her life, but in the end, her attacker had overpowered her. The discovery of Angie's body sent shockwaves through the small community of Idaho Falls. A murder of this brutality was unheard of in the area, and the fear was palpable. Who could have done this to such a young, vibrant woman? The investigation into Angie's murder began immediately, and the police were under immense pressure to find the person responsible. With a crime as violent as this, the Idaho Falls Police Department knew they needed to act quickly. The first hours and days of any murder investigation are crucial, and they began by securing the crime scene and gathering evidence. The forensic team collected samples of hair, blood, and other biological material from Angie's apartment, hoping to find clues that would lead them to the killer. The investigation started with those closest to Angie. The police interviewed her family, friends, and acquaintances, trying to piece together her final hours. They learned about the party Angie had attended the night before and spoke with everyone who had been there, but none of them emerged as strong suspects. Attention soon turned to Angie's social circle, particularly the young men she had been friendly with. One of these men was Benjamin Hobbs, a young man who had recently been arrested for a separate sexual assault in Nevada. Given the nature of the crime, Hobbs seemed like a promising lead. However, when questioned, Hobbs had a solid alibi for the night of Angie's murder, and his DNA did not match the samples found at the scene. Despite this, the police were convinced that Hobbs might still be involved, perhaps in connection with others. This theory led them to another young man, Christopher Tapp, a friend of Hobbs who had a reputation for being a bit of a troublemaker. Tapp was not initially a suspect, but after several rounds of questioning, the police began to suspect that he knew more than he was letting on. What followed was a series of intense and controversial interrogation sessions that would lead to one of the most disputed confessions in the history of Idaho Falls. Christopher Tapp was just 20 years old when he was brought in for questioning about Angie's murder. At first, Tapp denied any involvement, claiming he had no knowledge of the crime.
You know me, I'm not gonna screw with you. I think you can trust me.
I wasn't there. I know I wasn't.
I wasn't there. I wasn't even down the stairs. I wasn't nowhere around.
But the police were persistent. Over the course of several days, Tapp was interrogated multiple times, often for hours on end. These sessions were not recorded in their entirety, and Tapp was repeatedly told that he could face the death penalty if he didn't cooperate. The police employed a tactic known as the Reed technique, a method designed to elicit confessions through psychological pressure. Tapp was isolated, exhausted, and scared. He was told that if he just told the police what they wanted to hear, things would go easier for him. Under this immense pressure, Tapp eventually confessed to being present during Angie's murder.
The impression I got from you is you're like downstairs waiting for him.
Maybe I was, I just don't know.
What I'm thinking is Ben's cut her. Ben's raped her. Mike's raped her. I'm thinking maybe do these guys threaten you to do something to her so that you're both part of the crime? How many times did you cut her?
Just once.
She say anything?
Hell.
But there were significant problems with Tapp's confession. For one, it was full of inconsistencies. He initially claimed that he and Benjamin Hobbs had been involved in the crime together, but Hobbs had already been cleared. When pressed for details, Tapp's story kept changing, and he was unable to provide specific information that only the killer would know. Additionally, the DNA evidence from the crime scene did not match Tapp, yet the police continued to press him for a confession. In 1998, Christopher Tapp was charged with rape and first-degree murder based largely on his confession, despite the lack of physical evidence linking him to the crime. His trial was quick, and he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison.
About the monster element that everyone keeps saying. Judge, I asked you to stay my life.
The community of Idaho Falls breathed a sigh of relief, believing that justice had been served. But the real story was far from over. For Carol Dodge, the conviction of Christopher Tapp brought no comfort. While many in Idaho Falls were ready to move on, Carol was haunted by doubts about Tapp's guilt. She had lost her daughter in the most horrific way imaginable, and she was determined to see the true killer brought to justice. Over the years, Carol became a relentless advocate for finding the truth. She spent countless hours reviewing the case files, reaching out to experts, and meeting with anyone who might help her uncover new evidence. Carol wasn't just seeking closure, she was seeking justice, not just for Angie, but for Christopher Tapp, whom she had come to believe was innocent. Carol's quest led her to the Innocence Project, a non-profit legal organization dedicated to exonerating wrongfully convicted individuals through the use of DNA testing. The Innocence Project agreed to take on Tapp's case, and with Carol's support, they began the long process of re-examining the evidence. One of the key pieces of evidence was the DNA found at the crime scene. The DNA did not match Christopher Tapp, and this discrepancy became a central point in the efforts to exonerate him. But it wasn't until years later, through the use of new DNA testing techniques, that a breakthrough would finally occur. In the years following Tapp's conviction, DNA technology advanced rapidly. By the mid-2010s, forensic scientists were able to extract and analyze DNA with a level of precision that had been unimaginable just a decade earlier. But the real game changer came with the use of genealogical databases. In 2017, the Innocence Project and the Idaho Falls Police Department agreed to use this new technique to try to identify the real killer. They submitted the DNA profile from the crime scene to a public genealogical database, similar to those used in popular ancestry services. This process involves searching for relatives of the person who left the DNA, building a family tree, and eventually zeroing in on a suspect. The search led investigators to a man named Brian Dripps. Dripps had lived across the street from Angie Dodge at the time of her murder, but had moved away shortly after the crime. He had never been a suspect, and his name had not come up in the initial investigation. But when his DNA was tested, it was a match to the samples found at the crime scene. In May 2019, after nearly 23 years, Brian Dripps was arrested and charged with the rape and murder of Angie Dodge. During his interrogation, Dripps confessed to the crime. He told investigators that he had acted alone, that he had entered Angie's apartment with the intent to rape her, and that he had killed her to prevent her from identifying him. His confession was chilling, but it finally brought the truth to light. With Brian Dripps in custody and his DNA conclusively linked to the crime, the case against Christopher Tapp fell apart. Tapp had spent more than 2 decades in prison for a crime he didn't commit. In July 2019, after years of legal battles, Christopher Tapp was officially exonerated of all charges related to Angie Dodge's murder. The courtroom was filled with emotion as Tapp's name was cleared. Carol Dodge was there, having fought tirelessly for this moment, and she embraced Tapp as the judge announced the decision. The exoneration marked the end of a long and painful chapter in Tapp's life, but it also raised serious questions about the investigation that had led to his conviction. How could the system have failed so profoundly? How could an innocent man be coerced into confessing to a crime he didn't commit? And what could be done to prevent this from happening to someone else? These questions have no easy answers, but Tapp's case has become a rallying cry for those advocating against wrongful convictions. It has also led to changes in how police interrogations are conducted, particularly concerning the treatment of suspects and the use of confessions obtained under duress. The case of Angie Dodge and the wrongful conviction of Christopher Tapp had far-reaching consequences. For one, it exposed the dangers of relying too heavily on confessions, especially those obtained under pressure. Tapp's case is now often cited in discussions about false confessions and the need for reform in interrogation practices. In Idaho, the case prompted a review of police procedures, and there have been calls for mandatory recording of all interrogations from start to finish. This transparency is seen as a crucial step in preventing the kind of coercion that led to Tapp's wrongful conviction. Moreover, the successful use of genealogical databases in identifying Brian Dripps demonstrated the power of new technology in solving cold cases. Since then, law enforcement agencies across the country have begun using similar techniques to crack unsolved cases. However, this also raises ethical questions about privacy and the potential misuse of genetic information. these debates continue as the technology evolves. For Carol Dodge, solving her daughter's case was a mix of relief and sadness. She got justice for Angie, but also saw an innocent person, Christopher Tapp, wrongly imprisoned. Carol's hard work to find the truth has inspired many and shows a mother's love and determination. She continues to fight for justice reform, making sure Angie's story leads to positive change. After Christopher Tapp was released from prison, he faced the challenge of adjusting to life outside after more than 20 years. He worked on rebuilding his life and dealing with the emotional impact of his wrongful imprisonment. Tapp also became a vocal advocate for criminal justice reform, using his story to highlight issues with the legal system and push for changes. Reconnecting with family and friends was an important part of his recovery, as he focused on finding stability and making a positive difference based on his experiences. In 2020, he received a settlement of $11 million from the state of Idaho as compensation for his wrongful imprisonment and the hardships he endured. Tragically, Tapp died in October 2023 after an altercation in a Las Vegas hotel room. The Clark County Coroner's Office ruled his death a homicide. In March 2024, Daniel Rodimer, a former professional wrestler and congressional candidate, was charged with open murder in connection with Tapp's death. Rodimer's trial is scheduled to take place in February 2025. For more information on the Innocence Project, you can visit their official website at innocenceproject.org. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel for more content like this. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.